morning, starshine. The Earth says hello. How are you? I'm kutycorn. It's been a while since the last season of Bridgerton. How has it only been a year? I don't know about you, but it feels like an eternity. Welcome to this video about Bridgerton, or me complaining for a while about this series that I like and everything surrounding it. Because just because we all like something doesn't mean we can't criticize it, especially with things that happened during the last season. I want to clarify that I haven't read any of the books, so my comments are clearly about the adaptation. Let's take it step by step. No, let's take it character by character. I just have to say sorry for the bad English. I hope you like it and enjoy it. Now let's get started. I think people misunderstand her character. It seems that most have a very superficial perspective of her when her arc is very clear. Despite this, I think Eloise is a more complex character and her arc has more layers to unravel. She is a girl of approximately 17 to 18 years old who is still searching for her place in the world. An identity in the midst of a strict and conservative society set in the British Regency, motivated mainly by her insecurities due to the perfection that characterizes her family. Feeling like the shadow of her older sister Daphne, who is the model of the perfect daughter, she is afraid of disappointing her family. She is not stubborn and rebellious for fun. Her interest in progressive issues such as feminism or social struggles are not only things that genuinely interest her, but also a reflection of her fears. They are an escape valve, as she lives with the pressure of fitting into a mold that she may not see as her own. But what do most viewers see? Oh, she's a feminist and a lesbian. She's so crazy. Okay, although that interest is constant, it seems a bit like white feminism to me. She is still an upper-class girl in an era when the first feminist movements did not even exist yet, and she still has certain privileges. On the other hand, the fact that she doesn't show any immediate interest in getting married or in any man, despite the mini arc with Theo, which almost puts them both in danger, doesn't automatically make her a lesbian. However, there is a certain part of the audience that insists on this narrative, mainly because in the most recent season some people started shipping her with Cressida. For some reason, some expect a lesbian romance with her due to the aforementioned perspective that Eloise does not want to fit into the heteronormative mold because she is not interested in debuting, courting, or marrying for the moment. So in this search for LGBTQ representation, she seems to be the perfect target for these fans to project themselves onto. Women interacting a little in a period drama equal romance? I'll be honest, I don't like Cressida, and it's clear that the series has tried to give her more nuance and a little more background to make her less one-dimensional. But at least for me, they didn't develop her arc convincingly enough for me to feel empathy for her. The fact that she was going to be married off to an older man for convenience was a cheap ploy to make us empathize with her, because whether we like it or not, that's what happened in those days, and Cressida has been cruel to other people. Screw her, well no. It would have been interesting to have a subplot where the series not only shows us, but also reminds us that many women did not end up in a fairy tale like the Bridgerton family, where many lived in unhappy marriages that were not born of true love, but of economic or social convenience, as was often the case at that time and many others. We got a glimpse of this with Lady Featherington, Penelope's mother, who clearly married more as a strategy than out of love, unlike Violet, for example. Or with Lady Danbury, who married at an early age. That would have been more tragic and human, and would have worked as a kind of parallel story between both. Don't get me wrong, it's not that it's wrong to ship these characters per essay. I admit that it does lend itself to fanfiction, nor do I want to make you feel bad for empathizing with Cressida's situation. Who am I to tell you how you should feel? But for me, it just didn't work, to be honest. Besides, the idea that a woman who isn't interested in romance 24/7 is synonymous with being a lesbian is more of a stereotype. I also know that many people were excited about Theo in Season 2, but I don't feel like there's been enough development either. To me, it seems more like a whim on her part because of her rebelliousness, something immature that didn't happen at that moment. So I hope they can develop her story with Sir Philip well enough to convince the audience that their love story works better than Theo's, despite the doubts that exist since he hasn't appeared much in the series. That is, if her story isn't distorted like her sister Francesca's. It's time to talk about the changes in Francesca's story. Now that I've come to terms with Michaela replacing Michael, I have to say that my annoyance lies in the execution. If they wanted to make this change so badly, they could have done it much better. I would have done it without giving such early hints that Francesca liked Michaela as soon as she saw her. Just introducing her and keeping the development as in the original book in its respective season, where Francesca mourns John because she loved him so much, and then Michaela comes in again, where the story takes a turn in which Francesca realizes that she also likes women in the process, not that cheap love at first sight they gave her and a possible other love triangle that is already starting to get tiresome, now between the cousins. They started off on the wrong foot and gave the most loyal fans of the books a terrible first impression. Personally, if the girls like each other as soon as they see each other, then why did they develop this story between Francesca and John if she becomes disenchanted as soon as they kiss at their wedding? I know that in the book, she loved John very much and her main arc is her mourning for him. Her widowhood isn't just a romantic arc. It's a more melancholic and sad aspect of love in the fantasy world that the story has presented, something that was shown to us a little when they introduced us to how they lost Edmund Bridgerton. It frustrates me so much that in the series they throw everything away in the wedding scene, because their relationship was genuinely beautiful and they got along very well. It was a nice break from the intense and passionate relationships of the other siblings. It would have been a nice differentiator and would have given the plot more freshness. And I don't give a damn if you think it was boring, long-lived introverted love. I understand perfectly well that this is a series set in a real historical context where creative licenses are taken, such as a more culturally diverse society, but it is still the era of the British Regency. You can't just come in and make changes without considering how it might affect the story, for better or for worse. They have to continue to abide by the rules of the time. Internal plausibility matters. It would be too unrealistic for society to suddenly accept the relationship between Francesca and the new Michaela as if nothing had happened. It's not as easy as many who blindly defended these changes want to paint it. There is also the other storyline of Francesca wanting to have children, which she couldn't have with John but can with Michael. However, no matter how wealthy they both are, it's not as simple as just adopting a child as if it were nothing, especially in a society as restrictive as the British Regency in 1810 supposed to be. I must say that these changes do not justify the harassment the actress received or continues to receive, as it is not her fault that the changes in the most recent season are the result of the new showrunner's self-insert, apart from the fact that the actress is very beautiful. So the writers are going to have to figure out how to deal with the mess this series got itself into because of the woman who wanted to write your name fiction. Oh, Benedict, look how they massacred my boy. Not only did we already talk about how poorly done LGBTQ representation can cause inconsistencies in the story or detract from the original stories in the books, but it can also promote stereotypes and take away from the essence of the characters, as happened to our beloved Benedict. I can understand that we as fans have headcanons about someone being part of the community. But when this becomes technically canon and fans accept these changes without thinking twice, they don't realize how these changes can damage the characters. Didn't you see how they treated Benedict? They put him in some kind of polyamorous relationship that added nothing and turned him into that stereotype of a promiscuous bi or pansexual who goes after anything that moves, almost making him one of those no-strings-attached types. I don't think that part of the community feels comfortable with this representation. I can't think of how they could have implemented it differently or organically, because it really is a plot without direction. We miss Benedict the painter. Although Eloise did not have any significant development during the season that contributed to her respective storyline, at least she had a purpose as part of the conflict between Penelope and Colin, who were the central couple of the season. Benedict, on the other hand, was thrown into a subplot forcing a representation that contributes absolutely nothing to his overall development, which also feels like filler, instead of exploring something genuine and consistent with his personality. There's no point in keeping a character on screen if you're not going to give them an arc that contributes something positive. It would have been better to send him on a trip to paint portraits or landscapes in Italy. I want you to draw me like one of your French girls. As a result, we lost the essence of one of the most beloved Bridgerton siblings by using him more as an object of personal fan service for the showrunner. I understand that many people aren't interested in the story of Mondrick and his family, but I like these characters, so I care about them. However, I understand that the audience would be annoyed if their story interrupted the others, considering that in the third season they included too many story arcs that weren't developed well. It's understandable that people would be annoyed with them when we wanted to see Colin and Penelope. So again, what I would have done is not have Mondrick and Benedict appear until Benedict's season, and have this arc of the Mondricks getting rich out of nowhere serve to bring him and Benedict closer together, with him acting as a kind of advisor to Benedict, telling him to settle down after hooking up with random people. And that's where he could start his arc with Sophie because #monogamy. Although I'm not too sure about my version either. Anyway, since the next season is his, which is the third in the original books, and they're going all out to promote it when it premieres in 2926, I hope they can redeem themselves a little and give us a better season. Clearly, being an adaptation, there may be some changes, but the ones we saw could lose the essence of the story. Adding LGBTQ+ stories is not necessarily bad in itself, and simply because they exist does not automatically ruin a series or movie, but doing them poorly and, worse, misrepresenting them does. We have seen bits and pieces of these types of stories, such as Bimsley's in the Queen Charlotte series, which was well received. Even though I said I didn't like Cressida, I think her character could have worked as an alternate lesbian story on her own, without Eloise in the picture, where, before marrying an old man in an arranged marriage, she runs away with a girl or something like that. I'm making up fan fiction. Another idea would be to make a kind of spin-off series with original, self-contained LGBTQ+ or straight stories, perhaps based on a real story from the period, where the community isn't always secondary characters, but has the opportunity to be protagonists so that they don't affect the canon of the books, with a possible happy ending or something more tragic. A little cry is also a good option. Implementing this could contribute a little more to the universe than arbitrary changes to the story. Just because this series is set in that era does not mean that these relationships did not exist, only that these topics were taboo and more secretive. It seems that the series or fans are currently pretending that everyone is magically progressive, which is not consistent. As I said, people in the community deserve to be represented in fictional stories, and daring to do so in period series could vary, but that doesn't mean they should sacrifice the original material. Fans of the books also deserve to have their favorite stories well adapted for the screen. Clearly, there are stories about straight couples that can be very poorly written, such as those love triangles that I hate, regardless of sexual orientation, and their poor development should also be criticized when necessary. I think most of us would agree that those behind the series are not giving the original stories the respect they deserve. Not only did they give us very little time with Colin, but they also altered the original relationships between the siblings and crammed too many stories into one season. Speaking briefly about Colin, I would have had Penelope not reveal herself as Lady Whistledown in front of everyone because they forgave her too easily and didn't give her the weight she deserved. It would have been better if the Queen, for some reason, found out about Penelope's secret identity and confronted her by summoning her to the palace in private. And in the end, she became the Queen's confidant when she realized that her writings benefited society more. Not only did the relationships feel short, but Lady Whistledown's arc of being discovered also feels lacking. And let's not even talk about the poor makeup application on the actresses. They look gorgeous, but it's too modern and clashes with the setting instead of taking advantage of the girl's beauty with the naturalness of lighter makeup, which provokes criticism with that phenomenon of iPhone face or Instagram face. I don't remember what it was called. Also, what's with splitting series in half in a totally unnecessary way just to keep people hooked? The third season of Bridgerton doesn't have any cliffhanger to justify it like Arcane does, which divides its story into 3 acts. Besides, the first half felt like a season finale. It would be better to release 1 episode per week, giving people time to stay tuned, discuss the plot, and talk more about each detail per episode. Another thing I would like to discuss before finishing, and I leave it to you to reflect on. Bridgerton is sold as a stylized period romance, not as a historical documentary. It is more of an alternative universe, somewhat fantastical and romantic, something like fan fiction of the period. And that's fine, no one expects it to be 100% accurate. That's what Downton Abbey or Pride and Prejudice are for. But it can't become an anachronistic carnival either. It needs to maintain a minimum of social realism customs, marriages of convenience, class pressure, because that's precisely what gives weight to the romantic drama. If it loses that contrast, the plots lose their power and feel empty. Furthermore, many people tend to confuse fiction with reality. They believe that just because the series shows something in a certain way, that's how it was in real life. But come on, does anyone really think Queen Charlotte was of African descent? Maybe she had slightly darker skin or features that were different by English standards, but that doesn't automatically make her what Bridgerton presents her as. Just because something appears on screen doesn't mean it's historically accurate. It's like those who believe that the Warrens' relationship is exactly as depicted in The Conjuring, when those films are practically fan fiction based on real anecdotes. Or people who claim that in old Europe, no one ever bathed. Come on, use a little common sense. While the series has a certain responsibility to represent its era in costumes, settings, and customs, it is not its fault that the audience cannot distinguish between what is historical and what is invented. And Bridgerton cannot be accused of ruining the perception of the past, because there were many productions with historical errors before it. From white wedding dresses, which did not become popular until Queen Victoria's wedding, to the misuse of corsets, which many still believe were instruments of oppression. Personally, I don't need to see body hair in a period drama. Productions aren't going to stop just so actresses can grow their hair and please a certain segment of the audience. That doesn't ruin a series, nor should it be the focus of attention when there are much more important issues to address. However, there is the question, how much modern freedom can Bridgerton allow itself before breaking its own spell? Obviously, it's a fantasy, but as I said, it needs internal consistency to keep it within its own world. We can forgive aesthetic license, yes, but only to a certain extent. Because if everything becomes too modern, it stops feeling like a period piece and loses precisely what made it special. If you think about it, they made a woke series even more woke, inclusion for the sake of inclusion, rather than storytelling. I think the general discontent stems from uncertainty about the future of the series. I love Bridgerton, and I wouldn't want to see another series with wasted potential go down the drain because of bad decisions made by executives or showrunners. No one would want to see this series slowly turn into a bad series. The third season had some things done well, very few, but there were some. At the same time, it also had many more flaws compared to the first 2 seasons. If they learned from these mistakes and managed to adapt Benedict and Sophie's story well, they could redeem themselves and give fans a season worthy and faithful to the spirit of Bridgerton. Before finishing, I would like to announce that from this video onwards, I will be dedicating the content of this channel to general topics that I like, such as movies, series, books, and maybe video games. Well, not really, but maybe. So you can subscribe to my secondary channel where I will be uploading K-pop or music content. In any case, I will continue to make K-pop essays on this channel. Also, I urge you to interact with my previous Q&A video, so you can leave anything you want to know about me, and if you have enough questions, I can make a video answering them. Now tell me, what do you think? Do you agree with me or do you have a different opinion? Let me know in the comments whether you agree or disagree. I hope you liked this attempt at a video essay, or at least enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, or check out my other videos. Now I have nothing more to say. Bye-bye.